Hi, everyone. It's so good to be connected with you all again. I hope you're all having a wonderful day wherever you are. Dean and I are going to talk about something really interesting today. We are going to talk about the latest paper, the clinical trial on the MIND diet for prevention of cognitive decline in older persons. And the reason why we're speaking about this is because this paper was highly anticipated, and some people are kind of disappointed with the findings.
It is shocking, and it is it's a very volatile subject matter because when it comes to nutrition, it appears that there is a ideological war going on. I mean, this is not me trying to make it exciting. It is that exciting. There is a battlefield of ideologies that's not just about nutrition. It's about lifestyle. It's about the past. It's about preservation of the past, fighting for the future. It's not just about greens. If you thought that this subject was just about spinach, you had it all wrong. It's the Joe Rogans fighting the vegan crowd, and the vegan crowd fighting the hunting crowd, and the hunting crowd. Everybody's protecting their domains, and I'll tell you right now, as we're talking, I'm actually bringing my own bias. As we're plant based, we are plant based. And Aisha always is uncomfortable when I bring this up, is because, like, why do you always bring it up? Because it is a subject matter that's bigger than nutrition. Because if we don't get to the core of the psychology of why we are overweighing or underweighing truth, we will never make a dent into the reality. And my attempt every time is to kind of hold myself accountable to the data. And I'm not worried about this study. I'm not here to talk to you about this study. That's the least of my concerns. I'm here to see if we can, in these conversations, come to realization of what is driving us and how can we truly together get to a higher truth going forward. And our biases is, and I've just noticed, why is it that we always jump on papers that actually oppose plant-based diet? And we talk about it. So there must be a bias there, and we'll try to the best of our abilities to hold ourselves accountable. And I want you guys to hold us accountable. We want to be data driven. Yes, we have some ideologies which have nothing to do with nutrition, and we'll keep it where that is. That's a separate argument. But when it comes to nutrition, we have to stay true. But nonetheless, with this study, there was an uproar in all camps. It was all over the media, and CNN, on BBC, on Huffington Post, on Fox TV, on every channel and publication, that the MIND diet appeared to have failed. And they weren't talking about the MIND diet. They were talking about their ideologies. The one camp that won and the other camp that lost. And it's not about that. Because the diets do matter. The diet data is quite replete. It's open to be challenged, but more important than challenged, it's open to be nuanced. Now we're not fighting about the truth. We kind of know the data is quite significantly on one side that saturated fat does affect you. Yeah, there's some people pushing this carnivore thing, and some people are pushing the cholesterol against the cholesterol hypotheses, but all the legitimate avenues say that high cholesterol appears to have consequences, both from a vascular component and then disease outcomes as well. But it's more now about nuance: how much, who, where, and how we make the changes. What's the degree of change? Those nuances are what we're talking about. So, coming back to this paper, which showed, well, the media said that it failed. But even that was a lot more nuanced. And we wanted to first tell you what the paper showed, and potentially where the flaws were, and potentially where it was right. And lastly, most importantly, where we can go with the science together as a community, as a society, to shed light on the nuance.
Absolutely. All right. So the MIND diet stands for the Mediterranean DASH. DASH stands for dietary approach to stop hypertension. So these are dietary patterns that were created. It's like a scoring system that were created by scientists to find out, how a specific dietary pattern affects health. So the MIND diet is essentially an amalgam or a combination of the Mediterranean and the DASH diet. And MIND stands for Mediterranean Dash Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay. It's a mouthful. And this was essentially created by researchers at Rush University, started about in 2004. And the primary person or the primary team was led by Dr. Martha Morris, who passed away, unfortunately. And she and her team essentially looked at all of the data from the DASH dietary pattern and from the Mediterranean dietary pattern and its effect on brain health. And they combined it together and made a scoring system. And they tested it on participants in an ongoing cohort called the Rush Memory and Aging Project, or the MAP, a spin-off of that. The MAP had started in 1997, and the goal was to figure out how diet can affect cognition, and pinpointing specifically Alzheimer's disease because it's the most common type of dementia. And essentially, when you look at the MIND diet, it emphasizes certain foods, plant-based foods, and de-emphasizes others.
Well, although it was surprising that it had some things that you usually don't see as part of health food. For example, fish or chicken as well.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Yes. They the main foods that were highlighted in the MIND diet were vegetables, berries, polyunsaturated fats, especially in olive oil, whole grains, and beans. And the unhealthy foods that were they were asked, de-emphasized, or participants were supposed to limit were red meat, fast fried foods, pastries, cheese, and other sweets. So, desserts and things of that nature. And so the main paper, which looked at the effect of the MIND diet on brain health, was published in 2015. And they found out that when the participants adhered to the MIND diet, they reduced their risk of developing Alzheimer's disease by 53%. And even if there was moderate adherence, which is phenomenal, so it was not an all or none phenomenon, participants were able to reduce their risk of developing Alzheimer's disease by 35%.
Now, the caveat or the side story is that was a pretty robust study.
Right, it was.
With a fairly large...
And it was a prospective study.
Yeah, prospective study. And it wasn't necessarily a randomized controlled study, but prospective study looking at this. And 53% is just remarkable. You remember that this is a disease that at this point we don't have a drug that does, prevents Alzheimer's by 1%.
Right.
We just a drug was just approved by FDA that showed that it could potentially slow the disease by 27%, but preventing 53% was just remarkable.
Absolutely. It was wonderful.
Yeah. And then on the heel of that, there were many other studies done that also kind of confirmed and repeated this phenomenon of lifestyle and nutrition affecting cognition and risk of Alzheimer's.
That's true. Yes. And the way the MIND diet was different from its particular components, the Mediterranean and the DASH, was that it further de-emphasized foods that may be higher in saturated fats and emphasized foods that were high in polyphenols and carotenoids and anti-inflammatory and antioxidant compounds. So they basically reduced the bad further and increased the good even more.
Absolutely.
All right. And then after that, there were multiple other observational studies looking at the MIND diet, its effect on people who already have cognitive impairment, and it showed that it slowed down cognitive decline. It was shown to have a protective effect in the development of stroke and in Parkinson's disease as well. So since then, there have been a lot of observational studies that look at the impact of the MIND diet on brain health, and almost all of them with good methodologies have shown benefit.
And even recently, in 2023, a meta-analysis was published that showed a positive effect with MIND diet, although not as profound as the original study of 53%. And there was some tampering of those results, but definitely there was positive effect in the MIND diet populations.
Absolutely. So this randomized control trial was highly anticipated because it is the first randomized control trial. It's an intervention study, so people were asked to come into the center. They were taught how to eat or how to adhere to a mind diet, and we'll go over the details of that. But it essentially showed that it really didn't make much of a difference when it was compared to a suboptimal diet. So, shall we go into the details?
Absolutely.
All right. So,
The devil's in the details.
the devil's in the details. So, basically, what they did was they recruited 604 people, and the idea was to have an intervention group that adhered to a mind diet and a control group that adhered to a suboptimal diet. However, it's important to note that these individuals had a BMI of over 24, so 25, so they were overweight. The researchers also had one of the outcomes as weight loss.
So take this conversation as a detective story. Aisha's throwing in some clues to potential positive effect of the study, and then also the clues to potential limitations of the study. So the clues usually in a study, there are three ways you can see an effect. Well, I'm oversimplifying again, but in order to see an effect, or in order to make sure that a study has power, what does power mean? It means that it has enough time, or it has a sensitive enough tool, or a large enough population to be able to detect the change that one would expect to detect.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's kind of difficult. How would you know that? Well, first of all, you will have to know the rate of change of the underlying state.
Yeah.
The second thing is you have to know the general population, and if they're very different from each other between the control and intervention study, there is a confound right there. So you might not see effect, or you might see an effect, and it might not be because of the intervention. It's because of the underlying differences. Let me give you something very obvious. Let's say that the intervention group is 70 and above, and the control group is 20 years old. Well, you're going to see your results.
True.
Because the 20-year-olds are not going to change much, because their baseline is pretty stable. Their reserves are pretty filled, cognitive reserves. But the older population, if they benefit, that difference is going to be obvious. I'm making one example. So the original characteristics and similarities are important. Now, a lot of times you don't control beforehand. You control after the fact through statistics, because you can do more with it. I'm not going to get into the details of that. But nonetheless, the characteristics of the two populations matter. Mm-hmm. The power analysis also matters on the disease process you're looking at, cognition, and you have to know the rate of decline. By the way, for MCIs, which is pre-dementia, we know pretty well. For normals, it's very difficult to know the rate of decline.
Right.
In fact, it's so difficult, and the confidence interval is so large that your N usually has to be pretty large.
Right. So
I'm giving a little clue right now.
Right. So you have to have more people to show a small change.
Correct.
And you can if you have a small population, then you have to follow them for a longer period of time to be able to see that change.
Exactly. And there's a formula that you put in: the standard deviation, the rate of change. You do power analysis, and you figure out how much what number of people you need in one arm, and what number of people you need in the other arm. When we did this study in Cedars-Sinai for the MCI population, which is mild cognitive impairment population, we said that at the minimum we needed more than 200 people. And in this group, they have 300 people in each arm of normals.
Yes, they were all cognitively normal, and they went through some screening neuropsychological testing, the MOCA, Montreal Cognitive Assessment Test,
which is a 30-point test.
Yes, and they were all able to do their activities of daily living, so absolutely normal. So there was 301. There were 301 people assigned to the mind diet, 303 people assigned to the control diet. Mean age was 70, and they were all essentially normal, but they were all overweight too. So they received counseling, in person and online, and hybrid. And for the mind dietary group, they were told to adhere to the foods that are good for them, reduce the ones that were unhealthy, and in addition to that, they were incentivized by, some company donated blueberries, mixed nuts, and olive oil. So they were
three
given.
things.
Yes.
And the way that they measured their adherence to the diet, which is mind diet,
Yeah.
was by intervention of these three foods.
Well, they were
And teaching.
So yes, so these were just given to them, but most of them were taught what the mind dietary pattern looked like, and they had some in-person visitation and events as well, where they were taught how to cook and things like that. So they were very well informed. However, the suboptimal group also got together with the counselor, and they received counseling, and I'm wondering what the counseling was like. So when you're in a study, and I'm just kind of, discussing this with you. So you're in a study. You and I both go into a study, okay?
Yes.
And they put you on the mind diet, and they tell you these are the things you're supposed to eat. And you're going to know that this is a study to look at the impact of diet and brain health, right? And I'm going there as well. And they tell me, and so for example, I eat a suboptimal diet, right? I eat a lot of junk food and I'm not doing really well. What are you going to tell me? Are they going to tell me, like, just continue what you're doing?
No, they actually were taught a dietary pattern. So obviously they weren't told negative dietary patterns like eat fat, because that's actually unethical.
So before we go in there, I apologize. Let's kind of step back a little bit.
Yes.
One of the other things that they did was to cut down 250 calories from their total daily intake. So they were taught how to cut 250 calories from their total calorie intake every single day. So they were in a very small calorie deficit, both the mind diet and the suboptimal group. So I'm assuming that for the suboptimal group, they were told not to eat too much because they wanted to, for the participants to lose weight.
So there was already an intervention, a significant intervention. One of the most significant interventions you can do is calorie restriction, which actually brings to mind the fact that they have to control their food, they have to be aware of their food, and then they're going to know about healthy food. So there's an intervention in either way. We're assuming that the mind diet group is given more specific intervention. Okay.
Do you think that was a problem, though? Why would you want to include a secondary objective in the main objective? Why didn't they just look at the mind diet and cognitive outcome instead of combining weight loss and mind diet?
No, so you do calorie restriction to make sure that people are getting the same. So actually, it was the reverse. You do calorie restriction to make sure that calories are not a confound. But the problem is that when you do calorie restriction as a control, a priori control, you actually affect the whole study as well. And that's a problem with nutritional studies, bar none, all across. That's not as much of a problem as the fact that, as you'll talk in a little bit, much more happened to the non-interventional group that kind of points to the fact that they kind of got the news. Maybe they were being taught in the room next to the mind people, because the changes are just pretty wild.
Right.
Yeah. And by the way, you're right. When you introduce too many variables to control for, each control actually reduces your power. I'm misstating that. You have to account that in your power analysis, which means that you need more people in order to see the effect, in order to control for the other variables,
right.
or account for the other variables. So there's a lot of confounds already, and we're still at 300 people in each group.
Right. I know that really bothered you. All right. So moving further into some of the details, we talked about the incentives that the mind diet group received. The suboptimal group, control group, also received $30 gift cards at the same frequency. So, they didn't feel left out. All of the participants met 5 times in group sessions in 3 years. And this was at a place where they had education about their assigned diets. And I'm not sure if they mingled. Maybe they mingled, or that information is not given in the supplementary notes. They were given tips to promote weight loss and other motivational activities like cooking sessions and some games and things like that. And then one of the things that I noticed, and it's mentioned in the paper too, the pandemic restrictions happened. So the in-person counseling stopped and all of the counseling continued over the phone. And they received counseling, and right after, when the pandemic restrictions stopped, They had some people lost to follow-up, but 44 people declined to get back, but they rearranged the statistics to make sure that that was, attended for.
But you can rearrange the statistics, but in reality, you actually don't know what kind of attrition it was. Was the attrition due to the underlying disease processes of the people themselves? A lot of times when you have losses, you actually include the losses in your statistics because could the loss be because the people that left already had cognitive decline because of COVID, because of the stress, depression, and they were people that were that had a proclivity for cognitive decline. So already that in itself taints your study significantly. You can't do statistical, well, you do, but the statistical correction is often not able to account for the uniqueness of that attrition. Yeah.
That's a very good point. Right. So there were about 24 people in the mind diet group and 20 people in the control group who declined to return to the office. But they really don't give the characteristics of those participants and what happened to them. All right. And then they also did blood tests on them in a subgroup of the population in the mind diet to find out whether they were adhering to the diet. So they checked some specific micronutrients like zeaxanthin and lutein or the beta carotenoids to find out if they were consuming greens and vegetables that are good for them. And they did see that there was adherence to the dietary patterns, but the increase in the beta carotene and all the other chemicals were not sustained with time. And for the most trial, it was very modest. So
And this is in the intervention group,
right, yeah.
So they weren't sustaining the lifestyle to the extent that they were supposed to.
That's right.
My question is, did they test of course they did. Did they test these things in the other group?
I don't think so. No, I think the blood tests were done only on the intervention group. Yes.
Which is a problem in itself, because if we saw the outcomes that we saw, which we will tell you, hold on to the end, you'll tell you about the differences that we saw or we didn't see, then it would be good to find out if the non-intervention group also started eating healthy. And that's why, we didn't see the change. So they should, and by standards of research, the same test should have been done on the control groups as well.
That's true. So basically, that's what they saw, and I couldn't get a hand on the supplementary documentation to actually see whether they tested these in the control group or not. In any case, a subgroup of individuals from both groups, both the mind and the control groups, had MRIs as well at baseline and at the end of the study in 3 years. And then their cognition was assessed at baseline and then month 6, month 12, month 24, and 36. So they had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cognitive testing throughout the period. And all right, so that was the methodology of the paper. And the first thing that stands out to me is the fact that both of them were given very clear instructions on how to lower weight or lose weight. And I believe that this may probably this may become a problem at some time, because when you're asking people to lower their calorie, you are also kind of giving them hints of how to eat healthy. And the change or the difference between the two dietary patterns, they become smaller and smaller and smaller.
And the fact that they both lost weight, and that's a hard thing.
Yeah, I'm going to go over the results now.
And it means that the two things that are the most calorie dense foods are fat and sugar, and not plants.
Right.
So that's a problem. The one other thing that we should say is that besides the MoCA, they also did some other cognitive testing.
Oh, absolutely.
A more robust cognitive testing.
MoCA test was only used as a screener.
Yeah.
But the neuropsychological testing, they were quite extensive, and they were validated, and they were the gold standard neuropsychological testing that we do in the clinic and has been done in other studies as well. All right.
So the weakness was not the neuropsychological testing at all.
No, it wasn't. That's true. All right. So the results showed that both groups had improvement in their cognitive scores. As a matter of fact, when you look at the chart of, how their cognition did, both groups in the suboptimal and the mind diet had like parallel lines going up.
Yes.
And then
Although the mind diet group started at a lower level, didn't they?
they did.
Yeah. So that means that the
tiny bit
cognition
lower.
at the onset for the average was lower before this intervention.
Right.
And they stayed at that level, basically.
They did. They never crossed over the suboptimal diet.
Correct.
Yes. And so the difference between them were very small, though, and it was not statistically significant. And you and I looked at the chart together, and it seemed, so the study started in 2017 and it ended in 2021. And there's this one part where there is a stark change where the cognition essentially plateaus, and then you see a small decline.
It looks like at the end of 2019 and beginning of 2020.
Right.
What was happening then?
So it probably could have been the pandemic.
So we can't say that plateauing is due to pandemic, that the co-occurrence of pandemic and the plateauing. By the way, it's pretty significant. All of a sudden, this rise stops and plateaus.
Yeah. Could it also be that maybe perhaps because they couldn't do the tests in person, some of them may have been modified, and just doing them online could have introduced some errors?
Lots of things. I mean, the fact that we know what happened during pandemic. People got depressed. They didn't adhere. They ate poorly.
It was a difficult time.
The tests were done online. So whatever it is, there was another major confound introduced.
Right.
Which is the methodology in totality changed.
Yes. Absolutely.
And probably the environment of the people, the intervention and non-intervention people, their environment changed significantly as well.
Right. You know what the impressive thing is? They both lost weight.
Correct.
Both groups lost on average 5 kilograms or 11 pounds over the course of the trial. And, this is better than many weight loss trials. It was quite significant, and it was clear that the control group was making some dietary changes.
Yeah, I mean, for us who are involved in lifestyle programs, when we see people losing weight, it's an unusual situation. Weight loss is a difficult thing for people.
Sure.
And when you see an entire population's losing weight like this, and they're not the intervention group, something happened to make them lose weight.
Right.
So some knowledge was imparted. They also controlled themselves. There was already an intrinsic component of this, which was calorie restriction.
Well, yeah. So they were actually told, and they were trained initially to lose weight. I think from the methodology, it seems that the goal was to cut down on 250 calories per day. And so they did an amazing job, and they lost all of that weight. And then the MR imaging, the MRI of the brain in the subgroup of the studies, both in the mind and the suboptimal group, were done. And the interesting thing was that they both had the same changes. Actually, CNN got it wrong. I was looking at the CNN article, and CNN mentioned that there was improvement in white matter lesions. There was no improvement in white matter lesions. As a matter of fact, it actually got worse over 3 years. But there were some volumetric changes. The hippocampal and the total brain volumes changed in both similarly. But white matter...
In what direction?
They decreased.
Yeah.
They decreased in both groups. So there was really no improvement in their brain volume or brain structure. And white matter hyperintense lesions increased in both of them as well.
Correct.
That's basically what the MRI and the results of the weight showed. And so the conclusion...
Yeah. And the cognitive results, drum roll.
So the cognitive results were essentially the same. They both increased a bit.
They increased, though.
Yes, they did increase from baseline to a certain extent, but it was not statistically significant between the two dietary patterns.
So here's, I know that we should actually do the postmortem at the end, but let's talk about it now.
You mean autopsy?
Autopsy.
Okay.
When you look at 70-year-olds over 3 years, especially a population, I'm not talking about the individual levels. Yeah, individuals might improve. But when you see an entire population of 300 improving on the average in their cognition, that means that there was an intervention to improve towards improvement. Something happened that they improved their cognition. It wasn't just a normal course. It wasn't a control. There was nothing controlled. Something was uncontrolled. That's exactly right. Something was uncontrolled where the baseline population actually, 300 people, their average cognition improved. So that in itself is a massive massive problem that has to be addressed. How did that happen? How is it that they both lost weight? How is it that they both actually gained cognition? In fact, the mind diet group improved better. Their cognition improved better. It's just that the difference between the improvement in the mind diet and the improvement in the baseline wasn't big enough to be considered significant. So a lot of people said it's a failure. Well, no, actually, both were successes.
Right. Both
An
were
average
successes.
population of 70-year-olds that you follow over 3 years, you see decline. Bar none, you see decline. Unless there's an intervention. And by definition, you're not supposed to have any intervention in the control group. I know it happens, but that means that there was some seepage. There was some overflow of information somehow. There was some introduction of bias somehow, or that where the control groups were also doing some things to improve their cognition. And they improved, but the mind diet group actually improved further, cognitively speaking, but the difference wasn't significant. The way you look at data and statistics, it's not just delta. A priori, beforehand, you actually make a decision because then you don't. This is the beauty of science. You make your rules ahead of time and then you don't change them. Well, some scientists do it, but the good scientists actually don't. One thing, when I was working with Dr. Fraser at Loma Linda, he was extremely annoying at the time when I was working with him because he would make the decision ahead of time. And he would say, as a scientist, after the fact, you can't make changes because then what you do is fishing expedition.
Right.
And then, this variable didn't work. So let's throw another variable and another variable until you get your results so you can publish a paper. But in this case, you saw that there was a significant introduction of some kind of data that improved even the non-intervention group.
Right. Yeah. So the improvement was comparable. They both improved. I think, like you said, the control group was not controlled very well.
Correct.
All right. So
may I ask a question?
Sure.
So there definitely was a difference between the two groups as far as cognition is concerned. The only thing was that the p-value did not reach 0.05. Let's say, and the way you do that is you set that ahead of time. You set your p-value ahead of time. You set your confidence intervals and all that ahead of time, saying that in 90% of people, you would see a 10-point difference. That's how you did the power analysis as well. Ahead of time, you say, in 95% of population, this would not be by luck. This would be a reality. And it would be 5% that would be by luck. And that's the way statistics happen. And in this case, we didn't reach that 0.05 significance.
That's exactly it. When you look at the table, the p-values were way over 0.05, and that's why the statement was that there's no statistically significant difference between the cognitive scores of the mind diet compared to the suboptimal diet.
So my conclusion is that although I'm going to try to be non-biased, I started the conversation by saying that I am aware of our biases. We're always going to throw it, even at the point of exhaustion and redundancy. But it's important. Literally, as scientists, nothing is more important than to start with your biases.
Of course.
Repeatedly, exhaustively. Not like those talk shows or podcasts where they just throw a fact and nobody weighs the fact. And we have to weigh the fact. And we have to weigh our own facts and our own biases. Having said that, though, I see a lot of flaws in this study.
Okay.
The power analysis does not compute for me.
I think
doesn't make sense.
That's the big problem.
Then the loss of 40 people, and then you did a statistical analysis to correct for it. You can't, because you don't know the nature of the people that were lost. If they had some cognitive decline that was the cause, and there was a systematic difference between the losses in one group versus the losses in the other. I mean, that's just basically it. You can't, especially when your sample is so small. We think that even though the cognitive tools were robust, it might not have been robust enough, because when you're looking at normal people and tests, there's a thing called ceiling effect, where at the top you can't see the difference. Your tool is not sensitive enough to see the difference. So that might have been, although
Sure.
that's the least of my concern.
Right.
But the third thing is the duration. Although 3 years seems like a big, long study, but for 300 people, normal people who were pretty healthy to begin with, and they became even healthier, both of them, to see a difference in cognition in a significant way over 3 years might not have been long enough. But of the three, I would have focused on the number, on the N, on the sample sizes. I would, and I think if the power analysis would have been done, it would have been closer to 1,000 in each arm. Of course, I'm just throwing that, but I'm not completely just throwing it out of the air, because we did power analysis. We've done studies. We've done clinical trials. We did a lifestyle study that we started at Cedars-Sinai, and we did power analysis. And I truly think that they weren't even close to the numbers needed to truly detect the difference, especially with so many confounds in the picture. And then throw in the middle of all this COVID.
Right.
And so I don't think we can take this study as a meaningful negation of what we have learned to be that mind or mind-like diet, which is more filled with plant-based products, reduced processed foods, and saturated fat, has repeatedly been shown to be positive. This one study, which seems to be quite flawed, cannot negate that. If more of it comes, that's fine. That's science. We accept it. We thrive in it, and we go forward. But I think this one flawed study should not be an argument against an entire field and mountain of data that speaks to the healthy nature of a mind or mind-like or Mediterranean-like diet.
Amazing.
Or plant-centered, plant-predominant diet.
That's true. Very true. I think the biggest takeaway for me is that people who are over age 65, if they change their dietary pattern and if they lose some weight, if they're overweight, they can definitely improve their cognition overall. Whether it's the mind diet or any diet, you can actually start changing the way you think and the way your brain works with dietary changes. And I think that's a phenomenal news. That's a very empowering news.
Yeah.
Do you think it's reasonable to say that there are many ways to eat a healthy diet, just based on these findings? Do you think that the crown that the mind diet was given is losing its losing its shine and luster? And do you think that even if we make small changes in a regular, dietary pattern, that we would see the benefits?
I think, to me, it never had that much of a shine. I mean, I think parts of it seemed a little silly to me, but it's okay. We start with blunt mechanisms. Science is never perfect, but it's getting us to the moon. It's getting us to Mars. It's getting us communicating across, the planet in the small imperfections, but with the system that corrects. Where it's fine with mind. Out of the fruits, they picked one fruit, the berries, and then adding chicken, and that came out of left field. That there's no evidence of that being beneficial. The fish was reduced, and we always say that fish seems to be healthy, although we don't eat it for many other reasons. But you can get your omega from other directions. But fish is healthy, and so that's the part. And then the rest was mostly just plant.
Right.
Lots
That's
of plants. Just eat lots of plants. Yeah, I think the ultimate diet is not going to even be a ultimate diet. It's going to be a cleaner diet that's made for you. Now, I don't want to open the door to the functional medicine people like, what did they say? Find it in yourself, or yourself best, or things like
Right.
that, which are
Some
actually.
some person, actually, I don't want to take names, said this is the time for us to rely on our body intelligence. I was like, what does that even mean?
Yeah, you're intelligent. Your body's not intelligent. Not in the way that they want to actually grift. This is not about disempowering you. Yes, we should know our bodies. We should learn. We should know data and things of that nature. But to leave it open to your senses to eat this and that, that's just chaos. I would
That
love
could
to get
prove
into a
difficult.
beautiful, civilized, data-driven debate on that is how do you measure your metrics and how do you create public health movement around that statement?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Whenever you can't create a public health statement in a world where there's such disparity between population to population, where 40-year-olds in one population are having strokes and dementia and in their 50s and 60s, and it's all about lifestyle, and we know this. Making a statement like it's about your body is not a public health statement. It's a grift.
Mm-hmm.
Now, finding the right diet also is not about just complete restriction and time restriction and this and that, but it means that we know increase the plants, reduce the processed food, reduce the saturated fat, reduce the sugars, do it in a way where you can do it. That's simplistic, but yeah, do it in a way that you can do it. And there's a lot of habit tools that can give you measurable, meaningful, quantifiable, reinforceable behaviors that can reduce the things that need to be reduced. And then it will adjust to you and you'll do better and better, and you can go in that direction. And in the near future, we will actually even do even more nuance about your addictive. I'm doing an entire book almost about dopamine, which has been overused in social media now. But the way that our behaviors are moving us, are controlling us, and we are controlled with little like marionettes. But with certain behaviors, we can actually make those changes, and that's becoming more nuanced. We're beginning to learn more about it, and we can give people the power to know their own environmental variables that makes the difference.
Mm-hmm.
But at this point, to still have fights about the diet, yeah, I guess we're going to do it, and it's our job to kind of distill and negate and fight back. Even again. To your dismay, I'm going to bring it up. We are plant-based, but when somebody is wrong in certain ways, we'll speak about it, and we will speak to the fact that there's many ways to get to our health, but you have to do it in a measurable, systematic way, and you have to do it in a way where you can throw away words like moderation and instead measurable changes that truly make a difference in your life. I thought that this was a great paper to kind of do a little bit of a deep dive into research. I taught research to residents in Loma Linda and other places. I loved getting into the nuance of things.
Yes.
And this was a great paper to get into that nuance.
Absolutely. And that's a wrap. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to stay up to date with future episodes, please subscribe and follow our podcast on Apple or Spotify, and watch the recordings on our YouTube channel. We would appreciate you supporting this show with your review, as it helps it reach more people. We look forward to connecting again in the next episode.